Hi guys, it's Roy from Better 3D here with another Blender video tutorial, and today's theme will be Blender to Unity, in which I take an already created game asset from Blender and import it into Unity with the correct rotation, scale and collision boxes. So without much further to do, let's get modeling. Okay, so what I'm going to do for this video, I'm going to use the school locker asset that we created in the previous video, and I'm going to prepare this for Unity. First things first, you need to set your origin point to the correct location. Now, in Unity, when you import a model, it uses the origin point of the model as the insertion point in Unity. So that means when you drag it into the hierarchy, it will place it into the scene with the origin point on the ground plane, which makes it much easier to manipulate and less hassle to get into the right position. So let's take a look at this model. Right, I can see straight away the little orange dot there in the middle. The origin point of this model is not in the right place. We want this model to come in sitting down as it is, like it is on the red and green line there, with the bottom on the ground plane. So to do this, it is very simple. We put the 3D cursor back into the center. If it's not already in the center, if it's say over here, you can press Shift and C and it will refocus your scene and put the 3D cursor in the middle there. And then we can right click the main part of the object and select Set Origin, Origin to 3D Cursor, and that puts that right there in the perfect place for this model. Job done. Now, this model is actually made of 3 parts in one model, 3 separate meshes within the one model. And when we take it into Unity with this specific model, we will need to be able to manipulate these doors to open and close. Now, if I rotated these now on the Z-axis, which is what we would be doing in Unity, as you can see, it rotates around the middle because the origin is in the middle of the geometry. What we need to do is we need to put that origin point into the hinge just here. So we'll go into edit mode and we'll make sure everything's cleared, and we'll hover over this hinge and press L, and that will select that whole hinge. And now if we press Shift and S and then select cursor to selected, that brings your 3D cursor right into the middle of that hinge. So we can now go back out of edit mode and right click, set origin, origin to 3D cursor. And now when we rotate the door, it opens on the hinge like so. And now we'll do the same with the one at the top. And there we have all of our origin points set properly. Okay, and now what we need to do is we need to go through each component of the model and make sure that its scale is set to 1 and its rotation is set to 0. So we'll click on the main part and we'll press the N to bring up the options menu here, and we'll have a look at the rotation and scale. And this model is correct, scale 1, 1, 1, and rotation 0, 0, 0. So that's fine. Let's check the top door. And again, rotation is 0, 0, 0. Scale is 1, 1, 1. That's fine. And the bottom door. And I can't believe I've actually remembered to apply the rotation and scale on this model. The rotation is 0 and the scale is 1. Now, if you find that these numbers are not right, ignore the location because the location is important for the doors. But rotation and scale, if they're not 0 and 1, you can then select the object, press Ctrl and A, and choose rotation and scale. And that will apply your rotation and scale so that it won't export incorrectly. So now what we need to do is create the custom collision boxes. Now in Unity, when you bring a model into Unity, by default it has no collision to it, which means that in a game environment you can walk straight through it, objects can pass straight through it, which in some cases is fine. In other cases you don't want the player to walk through an object. So what you do is you create collision boxes. And Unity does create its own collision boxes, but they are pretty basic, and it's basically a polygon mesh which forms to the full shape of the object, or a box collision. There are various others, but they don't work that well. So what we tend to do is we create our own collision boxes to our own shape and size in Blender and export it with the model, and then in Unity we can use them as the collision boxes. So the first things first, let's hide these two doors just here, because we want to work on this main part, and we're going to go into front orthographic view. Just move that up a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a cube by pressing Shift A, Mesh, and Cube. I need to go into edit mode, and I'm going to bring this up 1 meter so that it's at the same height as the main model. So G and Z to bring it up on the Z axis, 1, and brings it up, enter, and as you can see, the origin point of that cube is now on the ground plane there. So let's go into wireframe, Shift and Z, and I need to scale that down so that it fits just inside the main model. So I'm going to press S and scale that down, but I don't want it to shrink on the Z axis, so I'm going to press Shift and Z just so that it comes in on the X and the Y, and we'll bring that in so it's just inside the model, just like that. And if I go to right orthographic with 3 on the numpad, I can check to make sure that's in the right place, and that looks fine to me. So now what I need to do is create a loop cut right in the middle there with Control and R. Left click and right click to set that, and then go into face selection with 3 on the keyboard and select these 2 front faces there. And if I go back into front orthographic, I can then want to inset these 2 faces so we can bring them back. So let's go in front orthographic and press I and bring that down. Now if yours doesn't inset individually like this, and it does it like this, with the 2 faces insetting together, all you need to do is press I again, and that toggles the inset there. So we just bring that up so it's just inside, just about like that, and that looks about right. It doesn't need to be perfect for this. So let's go to the side view, and we're going to press E to extrude it and bring it right back to the back there. And now we have our collision box ready and made. I just need to rename it and parent it to the main part. So let's go back into object mode, and we will rename this cube to locker main dot collision, like so. And then we can now press Shift and select the main, and we may need to press Shift and select the main part again. And the reason for this is when you're parenting 2 objects together, the last object is usually the parent object. However, it needs to be the active object, which you'll notice will be in a lighter yellow color. So basically keep clicking until it becomes until the right object's the light yellow color, and then we press Control and P and object keep transform. And you now notice in the hierarchy here that locker collision is now inside the locker main model, like so. Okay, now we need to do the same for the top and bottom doors. I've already shown you how to do this. It's exactly the same process, so I'm going to speed this part up. And now we're ready to export our model into Unity. Now, exporting a model from Blender is actually a pretty simple task. It's only a couple of clicks. However, there are issues within Unity with scale and rotation. If you just do a standard export from Blender to FBX and then put it into Unity, you'll notice that the rotation value will be -90 on one of the axes. And the reason for that is because Blender uses Z for the up and down direction, whereas Unity uses Y for the up and down direction. And obviously this takes that into account. Although it places it into the scene standing up the right way, it will have an erroneous rotation value in the inspector panel. Now, if you're not going to move that item, that's perfectly fine. That's not a problem. It doesn't cause any issues. But if you're using any scripts or anything that will use angles and rotations with regard to that model, it could be a little bit confusing. So we need to try and configure the export to take into account for that rotation. And likewise, when it goes into Unity, the scale will show as 10 or 100. Now, we want it at 1 because we want the size of our model to be the right size in Unity. So again, there's a tweak you need to do on the export panel. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to show you a standard export and what happens in Unity if you just export it straight out. Okay, so we need to select everything, and we need to make sure that the main body of the object is the active element, and we'll do that by shift clicking on there just to make sure that's highlighted in yellow. And you'll notice that there is actually two different colors of selection here. You've got a darker orange. It's a bit hard to see sometimes, but you've got a darker orange, which you can see on the outline for the doors. And then as you see the outline for the main mesh, a lighter orange. And what this means is the light orange is the active element. So when it exports, it will use the origin point of the active element as the main origin point of the model, and then all the other origin points will be offset in relation to that origin. So let's export by going to File, Export FBX, and I would just quickly change this back to the default. I've been practicing, and at default it will be like this. Nothing will be selected, nothing will be changed on here. So let's find where we're going to put our meshes. There we go. And I'm just going to click Selected Objects and Export FBX, and that now puts that in our folder. So let's go over to Unity and see how that looks in Unity. Okay, so we're in Unity with an empty scene. Let's drag our locker into our assets from our folder just there. And you'll notice it looks fine. You can place it into the scene and it places and looks fine like so. However, if you open up the object and look at the individual components, you'll notice, for example, the doors, the rotation is -90 and the scale is 100. We don't want that. We want the rotation at 0 and the scale at 1. And it's the same if you look at all of the components inside. And now, as it is, if it's going to leave that as a static object as it is, that's perfectly fine. It won't make any difference. But if you want to manipulate it with a script at all, you need to rotate. For example, you maybe want to open and close the doors. You'll need this rotation to be correct. Otherwise, the script's going to have issues with it. So let's delete those for now and go back into Blender, and we will do it the right way. Okay, now we're back in Blender, and let's export correctly. So let's make sure everything is highlighted. The active object is the main object, and we go to File, Export FBX. And now under this panel on the side here, we've got the different settings that we need. And under Transform, we need to change the scaling so that it comes out as 111 instead of 100 for the parented objects. So we'll go to Apply Scalings, we'll click on the drop down and we'll choose FBX Unit Scale. And then from the from the bottom there, we will tick the Apply Transform bottom. And that will apply the transform and create the correct rotation for the model. So we've got the scale and the rotation. And we click FBX Export. And let's go back over to Unity and see how we've done. Right, so we'll drag the new model back into the assets there. And as you can see in the asset viewer here, each component of the model is correctly rotated and scaled. Don't worry about the numbers in the position. That's just showing the position of the origin point in relation to the main object. The main object, as you can see, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1. So now if we drag that into the hierarchy there, it will appear at ground level, all correct. So let's give this thing some color. And you'll notice that inside the main model, not only will you have your 3 main meshes and your UV meshes, you will also have 3 materials. Now if I click on these materials, I notice you can't actually edit them because they're embedded into the model. So we need to actually break these out of the model. So what we'll do is we will shift and left click all 3 materials, and then right click and find extract from prefab, and that will ask us to choose a folder, and it's opened up into this folder with the mesh. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and select new folder and just create a folder called materials, and this keeps it all nice and neat in its own folders, and select folder, and you'll notice it's created a materials folder and all 3 of these materials are in there, and you can now actually edit those materials. Now I'm going to delete this no name one. We don't need this. That is the material that was automatically created for the collision mesh. But the collision mesh, it's not going to need a material because it's not going to be visible. So we're just going to deal with these 2 materials here. And the first one is a locker doors. Now we need to add textures to this. So let's go back to our assets folder, and we're going to create a new folder, and we're going to call that textures. And while we're here, we're going to create, by right clicking, second create and folder, a meshes folder for the main mesh, and I'm going to drag that into the meshes folder. This just makes it all nice and neat, and you can find everything. So let's go into the textures folder, and we'll go to my folders file structure. Let's find it under lockers, I think it is. Lockers, textures. I'm going to drag over the textures for that model and put them into that folder there. So we now have our textures for that model. Let's go back to assets and materials and select the first material that we want to edit. So click on there. And now, because now if I go back and I try to go into the textures folder, it's going to clear the inspector from that material. So let's go back to the material, click on the material. What we will do is we will lock that little lock button up in the corner. And now, no matter what I click on and what I do, it won't clear that from there, which is exactly what we need. So we've got textures, and we're going to drag the locker doors albedo into our albedo slot there, and that gives us the color of our doors there. And then the locker metallic smoothness we'll put into the metallic. Now there's a little bit of an issue with the metallic smoothness. Although it uses a texture that contains both the metallic and the smoothness maps, for some reason the smoothness slider still slightly affects, and it makes it a little bit dark. So we just change that to 0.8, and you notice that brightens that up a little bit. Right? Okay. And now finally we want the normal map for the doors to go in there. And we need to now apply that more normal map by clicking the Fix Now button. So now we have our door is all nicely textured. Now we need to do the exact same thing with the materials. We select that material. Oh, we've still got this one locked, so we just unlock that and then lock it again. And back to our textures and do the same with the other textures. So albedo, metallic smoothness, and drop that down to 0.8, and then our normal map into the normal slot and fix it. And there we have all of our textures are now in the right location on the model. But obviously you can see the pink there, that's our collision mesh, and we need to sort that out now. Right, so in Unity and any other game engine, collision boxes are basically what they use to determine whether an object can be passed through or manipulated by other objects in the scene. They're generally invisible, and obviously ours is not invisible. It's showing up pink because it hasn't got a material. It doesn't need a material because we're going to turn off display of its mesh. So let's do that. First things first, let's go up into our lockers. Now we have to do this editing from an object in the scene. We can't actually do it from the original mesh. We can't edit the original mesh. So let's turn off the lock on there so we can see what we're doing. And let's go to lockers and open up, and let's do the main one first. So open that and select locker main collision. And it's very simple. All we need to do is untick the mesh renderer, and that makes it invisible. And let's close that down, and we'll add a component, and in the search box we'll type mesh and select mesh collider, and it's as simple as that. It now has a mesh collider which is invisible and the right shape on the main part of the model. Now let's do the doors. So we'll do the top door first, select the top door collider, turn off the mesh renderer, add component, select the mesh collider, and it's done. You can tell it's done because the green outlines on the model there. And let's do the final part, the locker door bottom, and turn off the mesh render, add component, mesh collider, and that's our whole model there now with its own colliders. And we can check that. Let's select the bottom door and press E to rotate, and then just move that around, and it all moves together perfectly, just like that. Let's do the top one, and there we go. And that's our locker done. We have one more step to do, and what we need to do now is we need to create a prefab out of this. And what a prefab is Unity's way of storing the settings and the different components together so that they can be reused, so you can just drag them into the hierarchy. I mean, by all means you can use the original meshes and keep dragging them in, but they won't have the changes you've made to the meshes, to the materials, and so forth. So what we do is we create a prefab. So down in the assets here, we will create a new folder called prefabs, just to keep it all nice and neat. And we'll go into the prefab folder, and we will simply drag lockers into that folder. And then it will ask you, would you like to create a new original prefab or a variant? We want a new original. And there we go. We can create as many of these as we want, and they've all got the same changes as the original in our scene. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you've learned something from it. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, then please hit the like button, let your friends know about it, and if you want to see more videos like this, hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell so you can get notifications when I upload videos. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in our next video.